Returned to NBC in the 70s. Its new program, NBC Nightly News, uses a blend of ticker tape, typewriters, and a synth pattern that almost sounds like NBC-branded Morse code. ABC begins its ill-fated evening news experiment with camera bursts.
Barbara Walters. Bring you the news.
Before replacing these soon after with something similar to NBC.
Bring you the news.
And CBS sticks it out with NBC. Then in around 1978, news themes make a return in a big way. ABC introduces its new program, World News Tonight, with an authoritative new theme.
From ABC, this is World News Tonight.
Bob Israel's iconic ABC News theme will go on to be re-recorded a few years later with an orchestra, but remain more or less intact for the next several decades.
Good evening, and it's great to have you with us here.
After a groovy detour and some more typewritery synthy themes, in 1985, NBC introduces its new theme for nightly news, The Mission by John Williams.
NBC Nightly News with Tom.
This theme becomes a mainstay. Meanwhile, CBS continues to hold out, adding music to its broadcast, worried it will lessen its factual quality. They finally let up in the early 80s after Dan Rather succeeds Walter Cronkite, turning to that familiar newsy sound for the intro and the bumper music. But again, it doesn't stick around for long, and CBS continues swapping out their theme music right up until this day.
CBS Evening News.
In nearly 60 years of news openings, we only heard that familiar newsy sound like twice. So how did it go on to get so tied to the news? For that answer, we need to go local. The history of local news intros is wild. From themes and announcements that sound like the beginnings of game shows.
From WNBC TV New York, this is Live at 5 with Jack Cafferty, Sue Simmons, and Al Roker with the weather.
To ones that sound like ads for sex lines.
News, weather, and sports for a city that plays hard, works hard, and moves fast.
The experimental history of local news intros is amazing. Much like network news programs, many of these bulletins had humble beginnings.
This is TV.
Few to no themes, sometimes just sounds
This is the 11th hour.
or announcements. Occasionally, they'd have a random, groovy track. Or in the case of the ABC Chicago affiliate, actual music from James Bond. Along the way, ticker tape, beeps, all make appearances. But by the early 1970s, most stations had landed on themes that they'd stick with. Including a group of ABC-owned and operated affiliates that started using a theme you might recognize.
This is Eyewitness News, Monday, December 13th, 1976.
This piece of music, composed by Lalo Schifrin, is actually from his Academy Award-nominated score for the film Cool Hand Luke, starring Paul Newman. It features in what's called the tar sequence, only once, and actually not in the order that it's packaged in for the news. Yet in this tiny part of a massive score, someone heard a news theme and licensed it.
Those stories.
As in the early days of Eyewitness News, it is literally just the music from the film spliced together. And these affiliates used it pretty consistently for nearly 30 years. Updating the theme in the 80s,
This is Eyewitness News with Ernie and Aston.
then returning to the original spliced together film version a few years later. In fact, it became so linked with the Eyewitness News brand that other composers used to tease Schifrin, asking why he'd included the Eyewitness News theme in his score.
I still love the score, but why you have to use the theme of Eyewitness News?
You're watching the news leader, ABC 7 Eyewitness News.
It's not until the late 90s that Cool Hand Luke is completely phased out at these stations. But its DNA lingers, with that newsy staccato sound continuing to run through countless news themes today. And it wasn't just local US stations that used Cool Hand Luke.
This is National 9 News with Peter Hitchener.
In my home country, Australia, the Nine network has used the theme consistently since the early 80s. They've remastered the themes numerous times over the years, and it's still in use today. Although other news themes have used this staccato pattern over the years, Cool Hand Luke is the most notable to do it. And through its consistent use, around 30 years in the US and more than 40 years in Australia, it's likely been the biggest contributor to this sound being linked to the news. Although it came from a movie score, it's really hard to imagine this music playing under anything other than the news. In fact, it feels like it was inspired by the early days of TV news. The staccato rhythm, often played on xylophones or on a synth, sounds like the printing of ticker tape, the clacking of typewriters, or even the beeping of Morse code. The short, punchy notes and persistent rhythm have a sense of urgency and drama to them, as if to say, listen up. While news themes have continued to evolve from the electronic to the orchestral, this sound, this shrill sound hasn't found a comfortable home anywhere else. It's too distinctive, too seemingly purpose-built for news to blend or be used for anything else. And perhaps that's why today, as it has since the early 60s, almost universally, this sound means only one thing: the news is on.
Activision had some of the best games on the Atari 2600. You would think this would translate well to other consoles, but their NES games are not nearly as high quality. What happened? Let's take a look. What's going on? It's Poger, coming at you with another video. Okay, we're going to be talking about Activision games on the NES. If that sounds interesting to you, hit that subscribe button right there. And if you're looking for a family-oriented community, check out our Discord server. We're at discord.poger.net. Alright, we're not wasting any time. Let's talk about Activision on NES. David Crane and a few other employees were not happy with their job at Atari. Developers never got credit for the games they made because Atari didn't want other companies to notice their talent. They also never received commission for their games that did well. Just imagine if one of your games became a bestseller, but you got nothing but your regular base pay. Pretty insulting. David Crane went to the CEO of Atari, Ray Kassar, and demanded some changes to be made. Kassar, on the other hand, believed that developers were expendable and he could hire anybody for the job. What does he care? With his demands being rejected, David Crane left Atari and formed his own company, Activision. Activision would set out and do the things that they couldn't do under Atari. The developers' names were included on the box. The instruction manuals had a picture of the developer and blurbs about them. The games had more colorful graphics, which was done on purpose to make them stand out. In general, the games were fantastic. The developers had plenty of experience from their time at Atari, so it's no coincidence they were capable of making great games. It seemed like Activision was trying to one-up Atari in every way. When Atari released a console port of Defender, Activision released Chopper Command, which is similar in gameplay. When Atari released Battlezone on the 2600, Activision released their own first-person shoot-'em-up called Robot Tank. The game Star Master is a space combat game that's similar to Atari's Star Raiders. Activision had a very strong lineup of games. For example, in Kaboom, you have to collect all the bombs with the baskets. If you miss any, you lose. This would become one of Activision's most successful games. River Raid is a survival game where you must travel as far as you can without running out of gas. This game is the perfect example of how you can do so much with even the smallest amount of ROM space. Plaque Attack is a shoot-'em-up where you must keep the food from reaching your teeth. While it's not one of their most well-known games, I respect that Activision came up with something fairly original. Activision did port over some of their games to other consoles like the Intellivision and ColecoVision, but for the most part, they primarily developed games on the 2600 for the first couple years. In 1986, with the success of the NES, Activision would begin publishing games on it. Unfortunately, there's one very simple reason why their NES games are not critically acclaimed like their 2600 ones were. They didn't develop any of them. For an unknown reason, Activision was strictly a publisher and they hired other companies to develop their games. Out of the 15 games that Activision published, they only developed 2 of them. Their first published game was Super Pitfall. The original Pitfall is one of Activision's most successful games. Despite only being a 4KB cartridge, there's over 200 screens in this game. It's ambitious to make a full-fledged platformer for such an underperforming console. Pitfall 2 took things even further with vertically scrolling stages. This game was so well ahead of its time when you consider the hardware limitations. Super Pitfall doesn't do any of that. It's a platformer where you're supposed to rescue your friends and collect a missing diamond. There's some similarities to the previous games, like how large the levels are. It's not clear what you're supposed to do, which means you have to explore. You might prefer that. I do have to give some credit to the developers. The game scrolls in all directions, which is not easy to achieve on the NES. The levels are also massive. You would be surprised at how far down the stages are. The controls are terrible. You can't duck while shooting, which means you're unable to attack most of the enemies. The jumping is very slippery when trying to change direction. When you move off a platform, you fall straight down. There's no way to control your movement when falling, so you just have to wait. There's a lot of trial and error in this game. Sometimes I'm not sure if jumping down to the platform below will be an automatic death or not. Your character can jump through ceilings, which is why most of the ceilings are positioned just out of reach. To me, that's bad programming. Overall, if this were a 2600 game, I think it would have been acceptable, but the NES has a higher standard. The first two Pitfall games were revolutionary, but this one plays worse than Super Mario Bros. It seems like Micronix was trying to mimic the 2600 games instead of making a game that was more appropriate for the NES. Yup, that's right. The same company that developed the early Capcom NES games developed Super Pitfall. That explains a lot. David Crane, who was behind the original Pitfall, was developing a driving game where you could purchase items for your car. With Activision acquiring the license to Ghostbusters, Crane ended up modifying his game to be a Ghostbusters themed one. Let's take a look at the original version on the Commodore 64. You start off in a top-down view, and you must drive to the buildings that are flashing red. These are the buildings that have ghosts that you need to catch. If you're successful, you earn money. The whole idea is to earn enough money within a time limit. When you move the Ghostbusters icon to the building you want to go to, you enter a driving stage. You can move left and right, but this segment doesn't serve any purpose outside of catching ghosts. At the beginning, you can select what items you want, which will help you throughout the game. My biggest problem is how difficult it is to catch the ghosts. The beams are supposed to guide the ghost towards the trap, but their movement patterns are so unpredictable. If you fail to catch a ghost, you will lose one of your characters, and you have to get them back by returning to the Ghostbusters headquarters. Overall, I think it's too complicated for a Ghostbusters game, but it's not terrible. The NES version by Bits Laboratory made some changes, both good and bad. The biggest improvement is the controls. It's much easier to catch the ghosts in this version, and you no longer lose one of your characters if you miss. The driving stages have been drastically changed. Now you have to avoid other drivers, and your car has fuel. If you run out of gas, you return back to the level map without entering the building you were trying to get to. I do like that they improved the driving stages because they were pointless in the Commodore version, but the fuel system did not need to exist. Like in the Commodore 64 version, you can buy items that will help you throughout the game. For example, the longer beams will help you catch more ghosts. If you make it far enough in the game, you can enter the Zool building where you go up a flight of stairs. I don't understand how you're supposed to get past this part though. The ghosts will always block your path, and there's no way to defend yourself against them. This is where my run ended. This game does get a lot of hate, but I actually do enjoy it to an extent. I do think calling this a Ghostbusters game was a bad idea though. It should have been a completely unrelated game like it was originally intended to be. Let's take a look at Predator, developed by Pack-In Video. It's a platformer where you have to walk to the right and find the exit. Your default weapon is a short-range attack, but you can collect items like the laser which give you a projectile. Most levels are only horizontal, but some are multiple screens long. The controls are what really kill this game. Your jumping is very slippery, so it's easy to fall off platforms. Many platforms are not completely solid, so if you fall at the wrong angle, you'll die. The grenades are the worst weapon in the game, even worse than your default attack. It's near impossible to destroy enemies with these, and once you collect them, there's no way of discarding them unless you find another item. Sometimes the game will purposely put a bad weapon in your path, so you have to collect it. You also can't attack while ducking unless you have the laser, which means you can't kill smaller enemies. In this stage, I have no way to attack the butterflies with the grenades, so my only choice is to avoid them. It's a shame because this does seem like it would be a decent game, but the controls ruin it for me. With better jumping and better weapons, I think this would have been alright. Let's try Thunderbirds, developed by Pack-In Video. It's a shoot 'em up with some unique ideas. Unlike most games in this genre, you can take multiple hits before you die. You can collect the E icon, which upgrades your weapon. You can collect up to 3 to maximize your range and power output. You can also collect options which follow your character and give you better range. I do respect the variety in the graphics. In some stages, you play as a different aircraft that has a new weapon. It's definitely no Life Force, but it's a decent game. Here's Swordmaster, developed by Athena. It's a very linear platformer. You have a sword you can attack enemies with, and a shield you can block projectiles with. As you make it further in the game, you collect upgrades that will boost your character. Most of the levels are completely flat, but there are some actual platforming stages. The game can be cheap at times. The wizard can summon rain, which I still don't understand how to avoid. The eyeballs cannot be destroyed, which means you have to jump over them. I'm almost never successful at doing this. When you defeat a mini-boss, the camera does not reorient itself, so you have to move back. It's also one of the few games where jumping is faster than walking. I assume that's bad programming. The graphics are the one thing that stands out. Even the developers knew that, which is why they plastered screenshots all over the front of the box. I've never seen that before. The game contains a lot of fake parallax scrolling, which is impressive to see on the NES, even if it is just animated tiles. The graphics might be nice, but the game itself is average. Here's Rad Gravity, developed by Interplay Productions. It's a platformer where you have to complete certain tasks which are different in each stage. You start off with a short range attack, but you can collect items like the gun, which is helpful. You can also find life upgrades, which increase the amount of hits you can take. The game is not overly difficult because you have unlimited lives and you can take a lot of hits. The controls are actually very responsive. Your jump is nice and floaty, and I didn't have any issues making tight jumps. If this were Predator on the NES, I would have died several more times. My only complaint is trying to figure out what to do. A few times I got stuck and had to pull out a YouTube video on how to get further. Thank you, Nintendo Complete. I didn't have high expectations for this game, but it ended up being better than I thought. So we've talked about games that were developed by other companies. Now let's look at a game that Activision made themselves, Galaxy 5000. It's a top-down racing game. You compete against 3 other players, where you get a bigger payout depending on your placement. Your earnings can be used to fix your vehicle and purchase new ones. Your vehicle can jump as well as shoot projectiles at your opponents. The jumping is necessary because there's actually platforming in this game. The gameplay can be somewhat repetitive because you race on the same stage 4 times, but each time the obstacles will be in a different place. I actually like this aspect because you start to get a feel for the stage and you become better at it. My only real complaint is the poor frame rate. It's a huge eyesore. Otherwise, I actually enjoyed this. Unlike their 2600 games, which were consistently excellent, Activision's NES games were hit or miss, and there's a very good reason for that. It wasn't Activision that was behind most of these games. But why? Why didn't Activision develop their own NES games? There's a few possibilities. Activision may not have wanted to take the time to learn NES development, at least not right away. The company had a lot of experience with 2600 development, but not NES development. They might have realized how popular the NES was becoming and decided that publishing games was better than nothing. I do think this creates an interesting what-if scenario. Had Activision become an NES developer on day one, maybe they would have been on the same tier as companies like Konami or Capcom. If you made it this far in the video, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button right there. And how do you feel about Activision's NES games? What about their 2600 games? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching.